You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. My name is Scott Bennett, host of Great Awakenings here on American Media Periscope, and we are going to launch into our part three of the truth behind and within and in front of the 9/11 attacks that occurred in the United States, in New York, in Washington, D.C., and allegedly in Pennsylvania. We're going to be joined by three wonderful guests, Dr. Jim Fetzer, engineer Joe Olson, and prior intelligence personality and analyst Michael Harris. We're very honored to have them on, so they'll be joining us soon. But first, let us go right to the sovereign advisors to help people see and understand what financial issues and risks and investments are coming up in front, and how people can contact sovereign advisors for wisdom and help in navigating these troublesome economic warriors and investment possibilities. So let's go to sovereign advisors.
Hello, everyone. John Michael Chambers here. I am the creator and founder of American Media Periscope. Now, the world is changing. On June 28, 2021, the Basel III rules changed. For the first time, the European Central Bank is pushing the price of gold up because they need to maximize the value of their 10,000 tons of gold they control. What is this about? It's about global monetary dominance, and instead of suppressing the price of gold, they are pushing the price up because they need it to go up. You can take advantage of this paradigm-shifting rule change. The team at Sovereign Advisors, with decades of experience in analyzing political, economic, and social trends, can help you take advantage of what may be the most monumental change in gold in the history of the world. Call my good friend Dr. Kirk Elliott over at Sovereign Advisors, 720-605-3900. Tell him John Michael Chambers at American Media Periscope sent you, and request a free consultation.
So tonight we're going to be joined by our very intelligent guests, Dr. Jim Fetzer, Joe Olson, Michael Harris, and we are going to be summarizing and analyzing the 9/11 attacks that took place on September 11th, 2001. The great attacks that served as a military juggernaut to take out 7 countries in 5 years, the economic impetus that was devised by the Project for a New American Century, a neocon Zionist think tank that had built upon the appetite and the thirst for empire, and tried to translate the United States Republic into an empire, to travel the world and replace the Middle Eastern regimes by dissolving them like sandcastles before the tide, and erect upon these land masses Starbucks, Walmart, and other economic industries. Of course, it ended miserably with tremendous failure and bloodshed because of the miscalculations and the misunderstanding of a variety of dynamics and personality and cultures. And it has resulted in one of the greatest crimes against humanity and the greatest crimes against the American people and republic ever, certainly ever in the history of the United States, but ever in the history of man. So we are going to be looking at the 9/11 summary and asking our guests for their most critical, important points that the American people need to understand in order to really have a full appreciation for the 9/11 events, in order to guarantee that no such event can ever occur in this country again. And we see ourselves in a very precarious position based upon the tyrannical Gestapo agenda and operational modalities of the FBI, Department of Justice, imprisoning Capitol Hill protesters using false FBI entrapment techniques. We're seeing reports of Oath Keeper Stuart Rhodes being a potential FBI agent, which doesn't shock because this is standard operating procedure. So we're on the precipice of what could be another Patriot Act and another war on terror, only they're focusing on the internal domestic patriots and calling them terrorists. So in order to understand what may be coming, in order to develop countermeasures, we must understand the past. So let's jump right into the summarization of the 9/11 episodes. Dr. Jim Fetzer, I'll let you start out, sir. Please give us your full analysis and summary and what 9/11 in all of your research and presentation means to you and what the American people need to know it as. Go ahead, Jim.
Well, if we approach 9/11 from the classic perspective of motive, means, and opportunity, it rapidly becomes apparent that blaming it on 19 Islamic terrorists and a guy in a cave in Afghanistan was simply a classic false flag, where the concept originated in pirate times, where the pirate vessel would fly the flag of a nation friendly to the target vessel, and then as they got close enough to board, would pull down the false flag and run up the skull and bones before they attacked. Now, when you discover that all four of the 9/11 crash sites were fabricated and faked, albeit in different ways, you understand that something here is not on the up and up, that this is a completely phony event, especially when you zoom in on the Pentagon, because this was regarded as an act of war because of the attack on our nation's command and control center located there. Now, it just happens that the West Wing, which was subject to the attack, had been completely reinforced to be, as it were, nuclear resistant. It was the only wing of the Pentagon so reinforced, which meant that at the time of the attack, it was largely bereft of personnel and property and files. But the day before, Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld, who now has passed, and there's a line waiting to contribute to his gravesite, declared a missing $2.3 trillion from the Pentagon budget, something he most certainly would never have done had he not known some event was going to intervene to wipe that announcement from the consciousness of the American public so he could waltz into the halls of Congress and ask for hundreds of billions more in defense money. Indeed, in order to conceal the recipients of the $2.3 trillion, and when you consider that Dov Zakheim, who is a dual U.S.-Israeli citizen and also a rabbi, a Zionist, was a controller of the Pentagon, the chief financial officer, that gives you a clue as to what was going on here, just as do the effects of 9/11, which was the introduction of American forces into the Middle East in an effort to take out the modern Arab states that served as a counterbalance to Israel's domination of the entire region and to eventually confront the Persian nation of Iran. And while it was unsuccessful because of the intervention of Russian and Iranian troops at the request of Bashar al-Assad, the democratically elected president of Syria, it was not for lack of trying. Indeed, Donald Rumsfeld directed the section chief to bring all the accountants, financial analysts, and other experts to the West Wing with all the records for the missing $2.3 trillion, no doubt telling them he'd been profoundly embarrassed by having to make that announcement, but where he was in fact setting them up for the hit because an unmanned aerial vehicle, a Global Hawk, approached the building, which was not hit by any aircraft, and fired a missile into the West Wing, killing a total of 36 financial experts' accounts and destroying the records there for the missing $2.3 trillion. So already we have here, when we contemplate who could have possibly arranged for such a thing to happen, Donald Rumsfeld is a primary candidate, just as Dick Cheney, vice president, appears to have been the executive director of 9/11 from a bunker beneath the White House, where we have a very telling story from Norman Mineta, at the time our Secretary of Transportation, who explained that he observed an aide come up to the vice president and inform him, "Sir, it's 50 miles out. Sir, it's 40 miles out. Sir, it's 30 miles out. Does the order still stand?" Where Cheney whipped around and said, "Of course, have you heard anything to the contrary?" Where the order was to not shoot down a plane that was approaching the Pentagon. Now, the obvious thing to have done would have been to shoot down the plane. You lose the plane and the passengers, but you preserve the personnel and the property at the location. So already we have key signs here of who the participants were. And when you further look at how New York was destroyed, the World Trade Center, it turns out that the Twin Towers were destroyed by a very sophisticated nuclear device. Joe, who is an expert engineer, actually addressed this question during my False Flag and Conspiracies conference in the 5th and the 6th of December, where you, Scott, yourself were also a speaker, and he shall address the point being that the 19 Islamic terrorists could not possibly have carried this out. They couldn't have arranged the Pentagon. They couldn't have faked the crash sites. They couldn't have destroyed the Twin Towers using nuclear devices, nor 7 hours after that, the North Tower was destroyed, could they have brought down Building 7 in a classic controlled demolition. So, indeed, when we put together the fact that 5 or 6 of these guys turned up alive and well the following day and made contact with the British press, and yet the FBI has absolutely refused to revise its list of the 19 terrorists, you have all the signs we need to know what was going on here. And the perpetrators had nothing to do with Islam or the Middle East, except insofar as Bibi Netanyahu and Ilhud Ulmer appear to have been the brains behind coming up with a plan where Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld helped them to carry it off. And I'm delighted, Scott, that we have Joe Olson here, who's qualified in so many areas of engineering, to pick up the pieces and talk not only about the difference between the destruction of Building 7 and the Twin Towers, but how we now seem to have a case that's rather parallel to Building 7 in Florida with the collapse of the condo.
Yes, Joe Olson, please bring him up to join us. And Joe, your background in engineering and such, I will give you the floor and let you, again, tell us, educate us, what are the most important aspects that you've discovered about the 9/11 event? Go ahead, sir.
Okay, first of all, I didn't believe the official story from the day it happened, and I read an enormous amount of material, including their silly 911 Commission report. And then I got a notice that there was going to be an Architects and Engineers for 911 Truth DVD premiere in Austin. The DVD was 2 hours long. They were going to have a 2-hour press conference, and then they opened an hour early. I got there early in May of 2009, and I got to watch Alex Jones go on a rant for about 45 minutes, and then Richard Gage make a reasoned presentation for about 45 minutes, and then I watched the 2-hour video. But I got to see side-by-side demolition of the buildings along with what is known controlled demolition. And I looked at it and I went, well, I believe this, but I just can't believe that they could do that with thermite or with conventional explosives. Well, then in May of 2014, Veterans Today started running a series of articles under the title Nuclear Education. They currently have over 80 articles in that series. I started reading those, and finally in March of 2015, I decided I was ready to come out as a nuclear destruction, vaporization of the World Trade Center buildings. And I had that interview in March of 2015 with James Fetzer. Then in July of 2018, I was invited by Robert David Steele to write a memo to the president, along with some other distinguished folks, which included Kevin Barrett, Scott Bennett, Christopher Bolin, Gordon Duff, who's at Veterans Today, Richard Gage, and James Fetzer. Well, on and on. So anyhow, my article was Twin Towers destroyed using clean nukes. A year later, in July of 2019, I wrote an article using the same title that Jim and I had used when we did our radio interview in March of 2015, Unequivocal 911 Nukes, where I explained that some of the authors that authored the memos to the president for Robert David Steele did not actually have viable solutions. So I rebutted some of those. Then I was notified by one of my readers, you need to get in touch with Heinz Palmer. I sent the Heinz Palmer information. It's about 10,000 words. It's got 40 PowerPoint slides showing the exact sequence of the destruction of the buildings. And then it's got 3 90-minute videos explaining those. And I sent this to Gordon Duff. Again, breathtaking, solving nuclear 911. But then I realized that these guys had done a great job, but they hadn't really discovered the impact of the basic building construction materials in working as gamma sinks for the nuclear radiation. And the components of the building include calcium, carbon, iron, and silicon, and together they have 92 available radioactive and stable isotopes. So if you set off a high gamma ray bomb in the basement of the buildings, those materials are going to absorb those gamma rays, and that's what's going to give you a heat signature until December of 2001, which is 3 months later, of 2,500 degrees because of the radioactive decay. And all that's explained in their articles. Like Jim said, we did an hour-long interview with this on the false flags, and that's where I really point people to get a more in-depth analysis of this. And I also did a 1-hour interview with Robert David Steele on the wide range of faux science, including global warming, green energy, peak oil, Big Bang. 2 really good interviews, an hour long each. And then as far as the Champlain Tower, that's been an evolving thing. It looks to me now that we're talking about scalar weapons destroying the reinforced concrete. And that latest discussion on that was with Carl Herman and James Fetzer on Tuesday of this week. And that's an ongoing story, so we will be updating that as time goes on. Interesting fact, we've got 3 million pounds of material are going to be removed from the site to a safe storage location. But as of today, we have Hurricane Elsa, which is 475 miles southeast of the Dominican Republic with wind speed of 85 miles an hour, moving at 30 miles per hour towards southern Florida. So it looks like we're going to get possibly a HARP-directed energy weapon, a weather weapon to wipe out what's left of the site. So
Wow.
that's where we are
Wow.
today.
Isn't that suspicious? So we had the building go down that people have identified as potential McAfee, but we don't know. But suddenly an Israeli team comes in to do a cleanup operation. And now to clean up the cleanup operation, we've got a mysterious hurricane that I've never heard of coming in this time. Usually they come in September, August, September, October. So this is odd. And it's similar to what, and I'll hand it to Mike Harris, but it's similar to what happened in these sites of 9/11, where you had the Israeli cleanup team, an Israeli company that constructed part of the Pentagon, then came up and cleaned out the Pentagon after it was hit and smashed. And again, no plane parts were found, no tail, no baggage, no bodies, no wheels, no engines, just a burning part of the Pentagon that they later collapsed to make a bigger hole. But all sorts of anomalies and almost scientifically, physically impossible things. And your nuclear explanation certainly has deep roots because, like Jim had talked about earlier, how could a building be turned into a massive dust cloud? How can cars be rusted and their engine blocks disintegrated in a parking lot behind the buildings? How does molten steel underneath the soil of the Twin Towers be plucked up by big tractors and be burning red? Planes don't do that. Kerosene doesn't do that. Something else does that. So I think your nuclear discussion is right on. Michael Harris, please join us and give us your assessment of 9/11. Go ahead, sir.
Well, the actual takeaway that I had from 9/11 itself on a physics basis was the fact that the structure of the Twin Towers themselves, if you're familiar with what a microwave waveguide is and how you use it to channel energy to direct it in a particular direction, you look at the construction of the Twin Towers with their dual, the inner core and the outer core of the steel. I don't want to call them girders because they're not. They were hollow tubes, 2-inch, 3-inch thick walls, 48 inches by 36 inches in width. And you look at that, how that acted as a waveguide to channel the blast in the basement straight up the center of the tower, which allowed the energy to be directed directly upward. You had the inner channel, which held most of the blast, the outer channel, which held the balance of the blast, and that's how everything was dustified. I had this discussion with Gordon Duff probably back in 2009 or 10, and he didn't get it. And I just saw on the Palmer report that Joe Olson held up there, he shows exactly what I was trying to describe to Gordon Duff, but Gordon didn't seem to understand the concept of how a waveguide works and how the structure of the Twin Towers themselves behaved as waveguides for the energy of the blast and helped contain it, which resulted in the dustification of all the concrete and the steel itself. So that was one of my main takeaways there. And what I think is the greatest takeaway, and I think that the American people really need to listen to this really carefully. Number one, this country is not going to begin to heal itself and get on the right track until the real perpetrators are not only identified but prosecuted and brought to justice. Number one. Number two, this deception against the American people, and even those of us who are out there saying what they're telling you is not real, didn't happen, shows how powerful the media is and how impotent we are as truth tellers. We've been out there screaming about this since it happened, and we can't get a legitimate investigation and anybody to pay attention to us. And I think those are really the two great tragedies of what's going on, is that the bad guys got away with it. The country is still in a state of decline because of what they've done to us, and we have not been able to rectify this yet. The good guys are still losing on this 9/11 issue because the bad guys are still walking around free. Those that are still alive, minus Rumsfeld, thank God he's dead. So.
Well, it has set in motion so many endings of the American republic, the American dream. The Patriots immediately put in order. It had been written up before. The confiscations of freedoms. So many different things changed in the country that has deformed and destroyed the joys and the hometown. Classic Americana that we grew up with in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s and the 80s. Everything was blown up overnight. So I think as the days approach, and we do have access to younger generations, younger people, the alternative media, the internet, channels like American Media Periscope and Veterans Today and Revolution Radio and many others. This is a time to really broadcast with aggressive clarity and absolute fact what happened, who was responsible, and most importantly, what we need to do as a people against those who've been responsible, those who've done this, and what we need to do in our own country to really rectify this, besides this endless military juggernaut all over the country. Mike, let me start with you and then work backwards. What do you think we need to do in this country, regardless of how radical? What do we need to do to fix and correct this course? Go ahead.
Well, one of the reasons that the deep state exists is because so many were involved in 9/11 and are afraid of being exposed by it, that there's a tremendous amount of leverage. And it is my opinion that we need to purge our entire government. I mean, really, I don't mean just the elected officials, the ones who run for office. I mean, we need to purge the government. And I'm talking employees in virtually every department, everywhere. They've become too soft, too complacent, too bribable, too wanting to preserve the status quo. The intelligence agencies and the law enforcement agencies in particular, the Department of Justice, the CIA, FBI, virtually every department has become toxic to the American people. And this Patriot Act that they enacted is not critical, or it was critical to giving them power and taking away from us. And you just mentioned the younger generation coming up. They don't remember what life was like before 9/11. My son was 3 years old when that happened. He has no recollection of what life was like then. And these younger kids who've been born since then are never going to know what America used to be like and the freedoms we used to enjoy, and the dynamic economy we had, the personal freedoms we had. And we have to restore that somehow. And a purge needs to take place, and we need to reform how our military academies are run. We need to reform the curriculum in our universities. We need to purge our university system. This country is due for a major overhaul, and the leftists and the deep state have gotten as far as they have because the guys who were involved in 9/11 can't say anything because they'll be exposed. And so that's how this dynamic is playing out. And like every plan, there's what do they call it? The law of unintended consequences. And I think that has bitten these neocons right in the ass real hard. And I think they're still paying a price for it and are going to for some time. But the need to reform the system as it exists is critical. Now, the structure is good, but the personnel who are staffing it in the way it's been allowed to be corrupted through bribery, through extortion, through physical intimidation, through human compromise, through any number, blackmail, any number of means, it all has to stop. I mean, we're watching the Supreme Court dysfunction right now. They wouldn't even hear any evidence in the election fraud cases. They wouldn't hear them. No evidence. And so these things need to end. We need to stop it. We need to throw all of them out, no exceptions. They need to go get real jobs, get them off the public dole, get them off the public paycheck, because they have turned toxic and are hostile to the American people, the American people who love this country.
Joe Olson, I pose the same question to you. What do we need to do as a country, as a culture, as a population to rectify this, regardless of how radical or extreme or aggressive it may seem? What major overhauls, as Mike Harris has said, do we as a people in the United States need to do to expose and rectify 9/11? Go ahead.
Yeah, when the Berlin Wall fell, we got access to Russian files, and we found out that Stalin had 1,000 NKVD agents inside the FDR administration, working with over 2,000 Ivy League Fabian socialists. Under Jimmy Carter, he passed the Senior Executive Service Act, which allowed people that had no expertise in anything to be hired in as G16 level government employees, and they could be shuffled around. And we currently have 10,000 SES members who are heads of all of these departments. And you look at all the departments that are defective, every one of them is ruled by SES. And if you want to find out more information on that, go to aimfortruth.org. The Bayh-Dole Act, which was passed in 1980 and signed by Carter before Reagan took office, was supposedly going to stimulate entrepreneurship by giving government-funded patents to the people in office, bureaucrats in office, that were in charge of the research. So the entire CDC and the FDA are funded by research that the U.S. government does, and then when it sells that government to the pharmaceutical and the chemical industries, they get royalties that go directly to the bureaucrats. So we've got another system there. And then we had the Smith-Mundt Act, which passed in 1947 when they found out the CIA was lying to everybody, saying that you could lie overseas, but you couldn't do propaganda on the American people. In 2014, Obama said, oh, we're going to do the Modernization Act of Smith-Mundt, and we're going to say that you can lie to the American people. So now they've got carte blanche for the news media and the government to lie to us. So where do we start? We start with truth.
Dr. Jim Fetzer, yes, I pose the same question, and just to comment on Mr. Olson's observation of the Smith-Mundt Act, I remember when I was working in psychological operations and I had a top secret SCI clearance, we were always very sensitive, and senior colonels and above were always adamant that we were quadruple checking everything we were doing to ensure that we were not engaged in anything that could be construed as propaganda or psyop on the American public. Smith-Mundt was always referenced, and when Obama came in, he dissolved it, he changed it, and suddenly we had some very strange phenomenon across the country involving shootings, which have been exposed by great work such as Jim Fetzer and Veterans Today and Kevin Barrett and you, Mike, and others, exposing things like the Boston Marathon bombing, the Sandy Hook shooting, the New Zealand shooting. All of these things have been traumatized theatrical dramas that have had an advancing an agenda to manipulate and terrorize the American people, and it's being done by their own government. Jim, I put the same to you. What needs to happen to really rectify and overhaul this country and this government using 9/11 as the platform. Go ahead, sir. You're on mute, Jim. There you go.
There are two or three dimensions to all of this where Mike Harris has it exactly right. We need to have a series of military tribunals to hold those who are most responsible for the decadence and decay of the American government in recent times, which would have to include Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, Joe Biden. This guy appears to me to be simply an actor. Kamala Harris is an airhead, but there are a whole lot behind them who also deserve that treatment. Now, Joe Olson had the dates wrong, but he had the idea right, because the Smith-Mudd Act was of 1948 and the Smith-Mudd Modernization Act was of 2012, passed just in time to bring us Sandy Hook, which was a FEMA exercise presented as mass murder to promote gun control. Just to give you an idea of how profoundly were Barack Obama and Joe Biden and Eric Holder involved here, one of the contributors to my book, Nobody Died at Sandy Hook, Paul Preston, as a school administrator, had supervised some of these active shooting drills. He didn't believe what he was seeing coming from Newtown that day, so he reached out to his contacts in the Obama Department of Education, all of whom confirmed to him it had been a drill, no students had been harmed, and it was done to promote gun control. Now, just a month before Sandy Hook, the mayor of Boston appeared on a show that was hosted by Andy Rudy's daughter about Greater Boston and was touting his friendship with the vice president, who he explained to her had assured him that gun control would be a done deal by January of 2013. This, of course, she found incredible and said, what could possibly happen in order for legislation to pass so fast? The mayor would not say, but obviously Biden knew Sandy Hook was in the works, and Eric Holder himself traveled to Connecticut on the 27th of November 2012 to meet with the governor to explain to him they were going to take an abandoned school, conduct a drill presented as a mass murder, and move forward with their aggressive gun control agenda. Now, stepping back further, what this means is we've had not just the spectacular false flag of 9/11, but a whole host of others. Indeed, if you go back further in time, all the way to 1963, the assassination of Jack Kennedy actually involved multiple shooters. We've now identified 8. I can give you name, rank, and serial number for 6, where they were located, the shots they took, and the effects. Ole Domagard is identified as 7th, with which I agree. There was even an 8th on the South Knoll. None of them were named Lee Harvey Oswald, whom it turns out was actually standing in the doorway of the book depository when the Kennedy motorcade passed by, meaning he not only cannot have been the lone demented gunman, he cannot have been one of the 8 shooters, the supervisors for whom appear to have been George H.W. Bush and Edward Lansdale, but where the whole project was overseen and masterminded by Lyndon Baines and Johnson. Now, there's a great deal of evidence to substantiate all this. What I'm getting at is the American people have been played again and again and again, and they have to learn to see through, exercise critical judgment. There's a pattern, too, I want to observe, namely that Bush and Cheney came into office by stealing the election of 2000. Now, in that case, it was going to be tight. It was stolen in Florida, where the governor just happened to be the brother of the president-to-be. There was corrupt actions by the Supreme Court in that instance, too, to not allow the recounting of the votes to take place in Florida. But they were ushered in with a stolen election to bring us 9/11 and the Patriot Act, which reorganized 35 agencies of the government into one behemoth that was modeled after the Stasi of East Germany, widely recognized as the most efficient police force the world has ever seen. We need to get rid of the Patriot Act. We need to rescind it. We need to hold the participants in 9/11, including Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, and W. Bush, where Rumsfeld may have escaped the gallows, which he so richly deserved, but where he needs to be identified and vilified for his betrayal of the country. If we turn to a more general scenario, the theft of the election now in 2020 was done largely with voting machines that were designed for the very purpose. And it happened across the board in states all over the nation, where a bona fide result, if you knew the accurate tally, as Sidney Powell has informed us, Trump had virtually a clean sweep from coast to coast. He carried California, he carried Minnesota, both of which I was predicting, 410 electoral votes. Sidney had the map showing what actually had happened before they began to revise them to make Joe Biden the winner. Now, they had to bring in Biden and Harris in order to promote the coronavirus and the vaccines. In fact, the virus is not the risk. The problem is the vaccines, in particular these mRNA vaccines by Pfizer and Moderna, which Sherry Tenpenny has described as perfectly designed killing machines. They're flooding the nation with these immigrants. It's the same Kalergi plan they've used in Europe to bring, immigrants from Africa into Europe to destroy the culture of those nations, where now, for example, the rape rate in Sweden is astronomical. But because of political correctness, they're not allowed to identify that the rapes are being committed not by Swedes, but by those who have been imported there. These blacks from Africa who have no sense of civilization or society. So here we have Biden and Harris flooding the United States with massive numbers of Central and South American migrants. They're going to change the demographics. They reproduce at a faster rate than the white population. This is a reason why the Israelis won't allow Palestinians to become a part of Israel. They would rapidly transform the demographics. Well, here in the USA, it's happening as a deliberate policy of this figurehead president who is being manipulated behind the scene by a man who wasn't qualified to be president at all, because based upon my own research, he was actually born in Kenya. He's not a native-born American, and yet prominent Democrats like Claire McCaskill and even Howard Dean testified that Barack Obama was eligible to serve as president of the United States when he was not. All of them deserve to be held accountable. If you want to look at the big picture issues, we have to get rid of voting machines, return to paper ballots and hand counts. They're not only cheaper and more reliable, but they bring communities together. They create and contribute to social cohesion. We must get rid of gerrymandered voting district. We must use the Iowa model of retired judges to define the voting district so that those who are in Congress can't take for granted they're going to be reelected no matter how much their policies, those they support, are contrary to the interests of the American people. We must also get private money out of federal elections. In my judgment, all these elections for federal office, president and vice president in particular, but also the senators and congressmen should be financed by the taxpayer. And fourth, and although initially it sounds most counterintuitive, but I believe it's actually quite crucial, Nixon abolished the draft because he was fearful of an anti-war movement. Well, that took the wind out of the anti-war movement for a certainty. But what it also did was to disconnect American families from the decisions being made by Congress about war and peace. They no longer felt they had a stake in the game. If you restore the draft, you not only get the American public back involved in caring about what happens in Washington, D.C., but their children receive a form of discipline. There ought to be a universal draft where it's like 90% military, 10% civilian. So those who have objections to military can nevertheless make a contribution. It will instill them with a sense of discipline and responsibility. Right now, we have millions of young Americans who have never served in the military, wouldn't be capable of handling a rifle if their life depended upon it, which it may in fact turn out to be, but also could
Yeah.
acquire trade and skills that make them useful to society. So, Scott, that's a big, ambitious package, but it's really what the country needs to get back on its
Yeah.
feet once again.
Well, I want to, Mike Harris, I want to go in a little bit of a cerebral psychological analysis here, because what Jim talked about is very, very alarming and true. What we've seen happening in Europe with the infection, the infiltration, the infestation of these migrants from Africa, from the Middle East, into Europe, raping and pillaging and causing major problems, oil and water, no mixing. I see the same thing happening in the United States with these migrants being brought up on buses, and Jim has identified some of these trucks having Jewish stars on them, so it suggests perhaps a Mossad-Israeli involvement. But the bringing in of these military-aged men from Central and South America into the United States by traitors, Biden, Kamala Harris, by various government actors, people in Congress, maybe governors, all of these people are facilitating an invasion of the United States. They are not refugees. They are not coming from war-torn countries that are afraid of getting their guts cut out, like the Chinese Falun Gong, Falun Dafa fleeing China. These are economic migrants. These are people that just want to either come up for a new life, or they're coming up, because there's nothing better. But it's still illegal. It's still a foreign invasion. It's still a violation of Northern Command's mission to defend the continental United States. And if I was sheriff, and I think that's the most important position for real people to run and take control of, if I was sheriff, I would say not a single bus, not a single plane crosses my county, and I will deputize the entire county with any weapons necessary to stop any vehicle that is transporting and aiding and facilitating an invasion of the United States. This is not a refugee resettlement program out of HHS. This is the facilitation of an invasion to overthrow the population. And I think you're going to have the rape of Berlin coming to America in the next few years, because a busload of 20 militant migrant men can turn a city into chaos when they are armed with strategic objectives, with a shock and awe agenda. And I think you're going to see what's happened to many of these, white Anglo-Saxon farm girls in Nebraska going on jogs and then being grabbed, kidnapped, raped, and killed. I think that is going to occur 1,000-fold, unfortunately, but perhaps that will drive the country into an anti-federalist state of mind where they cut off the federal government authority altogether and taking control and manage their own neighborhoods and their own counties and stop all of this. But Mike Harris, I want to get it back to you. What do you see coming across this southern border invasion, since you're down there in that area, and how does this need to be stopped instantly and countermeasures developed and deployed? Go ahead, Mike.
Well, Scott, I've been on this issue now for 2 decades. In fact, the immigration issue was probably the primary driving factor for why in 2006 I ran for governor of Arizona, only to get crushed. But it is worse than you know. It's worse than I can tell you. And what's happened in Europe with NGOs getting involved in resettling these invaders, these illegal aliens coming up, NGOs are involved here, primarily Catholic charities. They're the ones who are putting these people on buses. They're the ones who are buying them airplane tickets. These are the ones who are resettling them to every corner of the United States. There is no safe place in the United States anymore. This was a border problem, and now it has become a continental problem for all of us. You couple that with the drug issue we have going on. China is, providing amounts of fentanyl that could kill the whole continent here in this country. This is China's equivalent of the opium wars that they suffered through when the British were trying to dominate them. We have multi-faceted problems here I wrote a paper in 2011, published it in Veterans Today. It's called Foreign Policy Failure, Mexico. And it calls for establishing a 100-mile neutral zone in the country of Mexico, using the U.S. military to defend the southern border from the Gulf of Mexico to the Pacific Ocean. And you give me 3 divisions, and I can make that happen here. I can stop this problem within 90 days. The other issue that we have is the companies that hire these people. They need to be taken to task. They know they're hiring illegal aliens. They know it, but they don't care. Everybody says, well, they work and they pay taxes. No, they don't pay taxes. What happens, we had an example here in Arizona called Danny's Family Car Wash. They had 13 locations in the valley. At one location alone, they had 23 illegal aliens using the same Social Security number. And so this guy who was running this car wash outfit knew he was hiring illegals, and he knew that that they weren't here properly, that the papers were fake. The reason he did it, and what the advantage to him was, that whenever he's paying these guys, he may be withholding from their checks, but he's pocketing the money that the government should be receiving in taxes, whether it's state, federal, FICA, etc. So there's quite an economic incentive for this, to bring these people into the country. So there's a number of things we can do. One of them is by enforcing the sanctions that were put in the Simpson-Mazzoli Act of 1986, which calls for a $3,000 fine and 6 months in prison for every illegal alien you hire. And I would go out and I would go to Tyson Foods. I would round up all their executives. I would round up their board of directors, and I would incarcerate them and put them in jail for every illegal alien they have on the payroll. I would do the same thing for Marriott. I would do the same thing for Tyson Food. I would do the same thing for Hyatt, any of them that hire large numbers. That would have a very chilling effect on the people who are willing to hire the illegals. I would do the same thing at the local levels for businesses like that car wash I mentioned earlier. That would be one step. So you start punishing the people who benefit from the misery and the suffering, because the people who come up here are virtually enslaved. They don't have a choice. They have to live 10, 12 people in a 1 or 2 bedroom apartment because they're paid so little, but it's better than where they came from. But you you say, look, we're going to start enforcing internal enforcement. You've got 90 days to clear out. Back in Simpson-Mazzoli, we were promised a one-time amnesty that 300,000 people were going to take advantage of. Well, 3.2 million people took advantage of it, so they're off by 11-to-1 odds on that one. We've had 7 amnesties since then, resulting in an additional 37 million American citizens who entered this country illegally. We need to reverse those amnesties and say, no, you don't belong here, you broke the law, our corrupt politicians, we're not putting up with this crap anymore. But you mentioned a critical issue here. Our white majority, our American-born majority, black and white, is rapidly declining. And we are being population replaced in this country to where blacks and whites born in this country are no longer going to be the majority. We're going to be more of an immigrant country, fresh immigrant country with no loyalty to us because they broke the law to get here. They don't deserve to be here. They have their own country. It's not our fault that they let their country be a shithole. Now they're coming here to turn our country into a shithole, as Donald Trump calls it, and that's exactly what they'll do. People must remember you cannot maintain a first world culture and a first world economy with a third world population. The people we're getting coming across the border are illiterate in their own language, much less in English. So we're really burdened here. They're exerting the Priven-Cloward methodology here of overburden the system so much that it breaks. This is straight out of Saul Alinsky, the University of Chicago, another hotbed of socialist communist action here. We can stop all this, but we have to take bold stroke, decisive action. Right now, the political will does not exist. We are still paralyzed by it. The good guys, our side, we rely on the rule of law, and we allow that to hamstring us. And so we can't be effective. The bad guys break every rule there is. They lie, they cheat, they steal, they blackmail, they bribe, they murder. They do whatever it takes to accomplish their goals. Their ends justifies their means. And we sit back here where we're playing Marcus of Queensberry boxing rules against an MMA fighter. Who do you think's going to win that bout? You know, they're winning and we're losing because we've got to take off the gloves. We've got to realize that we are in a state of war. This is an invasion by foreign powers. This is a you look at the fentanyl and the other drugs coming across the border as chemical weapons entering our country and destroying our population. Time to wake up, folks. It's time to take this and get real about it, because this is a war, and our kids are not going to survive another generation, because they're going to be crushed, they're going to be killed, and it'll be like living in Honduras or Guatemala or some other third world country down there where MS-13. And by the way, does anyone know the origins of MS-13? Because I'll tell you the story. During the Iran-Contra War, where Ollie North, John Poindexter, and William Colby were importing cocaine from South America, converting it to crack cocaine, selling it into the black inner city to fund their war that Congress wouldn't fund. That's what they did. It was a business model that worked for them. You wonder why we've been in Afghanistan for 19 going on 20 years? It's because the CIA and the intelligence communities are using the same business model to fund black programs to change the country in their image against the will of the people. It works. It produces income. It allows them to have $3 trillion a year of income that is not accounted for, that they can do anything they want with. That's what's going on behind the scenes. MS-13 were the Contras. They were trained at Fort Benning at the School of the Americas. That group that we trained in that brutality to how to win the war against the Sandinistas in Nicaragua, that group has become MS-13, have taken those exact same methods, and they're using them in American cities and using them against American citizens right now, right here. This is the long-range consequences of this type of misguided foreign policy that we have been on, for the last 30, 40, 50 years here. And it's time that people wake up that our enemy is a domestic enemy. It resides in the intelligence community. It resides with foreign powers who wish to hurt us and harm us, who are bribing and blackmailing these people. They're working together because they all have a common goal of seizing power and obtaining great wealth. And they're here to strip this country. And it's time that we take some truly drastic action. And any general who is involved in Afghanistan, and I'm talking about specifically Stanley McChrystal and Mattis, who served under Trump. These guys were both in Afghanistan. They were aware of the opium problem. They were aware of opium shipments to the United States and other points around the world, and they are not to be trusted because they have enriched themselves, and they are liable to blackmail. They cannot break the code of silence, because if they do, they will go down. And so you have this people that have been doing these things against the American people, acts of treason, acts of sedition that need to be punished. And there are elements within the military who I know are good and noble. I would love to see the colonels in this army overthrow the high command, take over and do the right thing. I would love to see it, because the backbone of the military is with the colonels and the officer corps, as well as your non-commissioned officers. Those are the guys who make it happen. And believe me, the guys that I talk to, the guys I'm in touch with, they're so sick of this political correct nonsense, it's not funny. If you're going to be in the military, you're in the military to go to war and fight, not lose like we've done. Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan. It's been lose after lose after lose. It's been keep the military spending high, keep the munitions being used. The Raytheons of the world love it. The Northrop Grummans of the world love it because their profits are good. They can't live without a war. They're trying to provoke Iran and Russia right now. Russia is not the former Soviet Union. It has changed. And there is so much stacked against us as a people that we really have to get serious, or they're going to knock on our door and drag us out, or try to. I will go shoot at it.
Let me just say this. You hit a very powerful point that kind of brings us to a conclusion before we go to Joe, and that is every military person that was in the military at the time of 9/11 is responsible for treason, because they have not exposed, they have not discussed, they have not disclosed, they have not revealed what really happened at the Pentagon. That was when the moment of declaration of war occurred, where are these generals like Mattis, like Stanley McChrystal, like Flynn, like the NSA guy Keith Alexander, like all of these people that have for the past 30 years been in the military industrial complex, been in the army. They knew and they had access to the intelligence, and they would have seen that 9/11 was a great false flag. And I think it's the greatest betrayal of the American people that those of us who've worn the uniform and have discovered 9/11 was false, like I did when I was thrown in prison by Obama and Biden for exposing their terrorist financing. That's where I discovered 9/11 was false, and it totally changed me. But where are these older generals that had high level clearances that are still maintaining this lie that 9/11 was an intelligence failure, according to Jeffrey Prather, which I'm very disturbed by, because it wasn't an intelligence failure. I would put all three of you against Tony Schaefer and Prather and Flynn and Mattis and anybody else that has the gall or the mendacity to try and tell me that the Solomon building just happened to fall at free fall speed, that the Pentagon was struck by a plane, but there's no plane parts there, that the Twin Towers suddenly fell in their own footprint and turned into dust. How can military people maintain any integrity, any honor, and still not come 100% clean and a mea culpa and a disclosure?
Let me interject here. We have a more immediate
Scott,
problem.
you have to restrict that to the officers who would have been in the position to know better. Do not extend that to the enlisted. All the subordinates who wouldn't have been in the position were simply following orders. So you don't want a wholesale condemnation of the military. You want to condemn the officer corps who should have known better, and that's a very substantial group, particularly at the Pentagon at the time.
But let me interject here. We have a true national security emergency on the southern border right now, today, real time. Why do we not have troops down there in Mexico stopping the tide of immigrants coming across the border? Why is that not going on this minute here? I wrote that paper back in 2011, and nobody's done anything about it. And you know what? It's actionable. It works. We can secure the DMZ in Korea. How come we can't secure the DMZ with Mexico? Because the cartels
we know the
serious
answer to that. It's because Joe Biden and Kamala Harris stole the election. We know the answer. I think you want to get Joe in here, if I'm not mistaken.
Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, basically we are in full spectrum asymmetrical warfare, and 911 was an intelligence coup, an enormous success. They knew what they were doing and they did it. We got audio on?
Yes, go ahead.
We hear you.
Go, Joe.
I met Lieutenant Colonel Alan West on May 9th in Dallas, Dealey Plaza protest to open Texas, along with State Senator Bob Hall, who's an electrical engineer and a U.S. Air Force lieutenant. I explained to them 911 in 15 minutes, showing the same slides and material that I've shown you guys. Both of them agreed that that was more compelling than anything that the government had said, but both of them said there was nothing they could do about it. I said, au contraire, the day's coming when you can. So both of them were put on notice a year ago. Well, on May 23rd, Alan West spoke at the Texas State Capitol along with Stuart Rhodes and the Oath Keepers. And I got to meet Stuart and listen to him and watch him firsthand. And I could guarantee you that guy's a deep state tool 100%. But interestingly enough, on his way back to Dallas, driving in his Victory motorcycle through Waco, home of the Janet Reno Davidian roast and the Twin Towers biker massacre, he was run off the road at about 80 miles an hour and broke his shoulder. And I got to talk to him after that, and I said, you really need to be in a position of power where you can do something about this. Well, he ran last summer and got elected as chairman of the GOP for the state of Texas. He served in that position now for a year. He stepped down, and he was interviewed today, and he said that within the next 96 hours, he's going to announce which state office he's going to run for, but it's a well-known secret. He's running for governor, and he knows what happened, and he knows who was involved in this. And there's enough people in the state of Texas that are going to turn this around, at least for Texas, and maybe will be the model for the rest of the nation.
I think you're right, and I think the model is a renewed sense of tribalism, a tribalism that unites the blacks and the whites and the Hindus and the Sikhs and the Asians and the Hispanics, all of the people that have come to this country legally to preserve the American dream, to honor the traditions and the principles of the American culture and to build upon it. That is the citizenry of the American people. Women who come across the border and have a kid under a tree, that kid is not a citizen. It's a violation of the Constitution to give citizenship to
that's never been adjudicated, and it needs to be adjudicated. That law has that the 14th Amendment has never been adjudicated, and it needs to be adjudicated immediately. And anyone who's gotten citizenship that way, it needs to be completely reversed now. And you know what? I don't want to break up their families. I want to send them all home. And you know what this country needs? We need a 20-year moratorium on all immigration so we can stabilize our own population. We don't need additional people here. They're screwing the people who came here legally, who built this country. My family's lived in this country, 12 generations on my father's side. 12 generations of Americans born here. I got no other place to go. This is my country. And the people who've been here the longest are getting treated the worst. And if you're a newbie coming in here, you got it made because we did all the work for you to make it easy. And it's time to take this country back for those who truly built it.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're coming to the end, Jim. Jim, let me just set this up first before we go to you, Jim. You're right. We are in a state of war, and that means we have to get our own house in order. We need to be allying with Russia, which is our closest cousin of our similar mentalities and culture and conservative values. We need to be pulling out of these endless wars and not provoking Iran and not provoking Russia and Ukraine by trying to stir up civil wars. And we certainly need to be focusing less on this military juggernaut of empire and focusing on what you identified, Mike, which is guarding our border across that neutral zone of Mexico and completely returning America, I think, to an anti-federalist mentality is going to secure us to defend our own counties and cities and towns and divorce ourselves of this failed federalism. Jim, I'll hand it to you for your closing thoughts in the next few minutes. Go ahead.
Well, Scott, it's really, your sentiments are right, but it's Obama, it's Biden, it's Harris who are promoting tribalism, meaning segmenting different groups of the community, turning them into victims, whether it's Native Americans, Black Americans, Latinos, or whatnot. What we need is a revived sense of nationalism. Donald Trump was bringing that. What we need is the Constitution to be enforced for one and all, equal justice under law. That's the meaning of the very concept. All men are created equal, not in ability, not in size, not in shape, not in intelligence, but they're all equal in the eyes of the law to have equal opportunity, equal justice. Obama, Harris are violating that blatantly. They're imposing, seeking to make a matter of federal policy, discrimination against whites. It's unconstitutional. The courts are speaking out about it. You're right in your motives. You have the perfect agenda, Scott. But we want to be sure, make it clear, what we're out is to support the United States of America and the principles for which it has always stood, which have been corrupted and distorted by the Democrats in a manner I never thought possible, where this once great American party has turned into a socialist, communist, Marxist entity promoting the interests of communist China, not those of the United States. Sad to say.
Yes, very, very well said. I agree with you 100%, Jim. The Constitution and our uniting ideas need to be preeminent. And I would say let us always be recognizing that America is splitting up between the sheep and the goats. We're seeing a portion of our population descend into mad dog lunatics, Antifa, Black Lives Matter, these crazed Democrats that are out performing all sorts of burning and looting and destructing. That could be coming very, very soon if President Trump resumes his commander-in-chief position. If the audits declare that he is the president, we could see a very explosive Antifa left-wing group in this country, and in these immigrants that have been secretly seated here, engaging in a very bloody, violent response. So let us be prepared.
You're not hearing this in the news, but there's been massive seizures of Chinese weapons coming across the southern border. Massive seizures, 35,000 rifles at a time, broken down into parts to be assembled later. So these are coming in regularly across the border, but you're not hearing a word about it. Just like you're not hearing very much about the drugs coming across the border.
Yeah. Well, gentlemen, we are out of time. It is an honor to be with you. We will have you on again, and let us hope and pray for our president, Donald J. Trump, to be returned as commander-in-chief. We pray for the United States of America, and let us continue to stand, and let us continue to broadcast the truth on instruments like American Media Periscope, because this is the Great Awakening. Awaken people to the realities of 9/11 as the cornerstone upon which our country fell apart, and it is also the cornerstone upon which we need to rebuild our country and show the facts of 9/11 and use that to jettison us into rebuilding this country on so many different levels, stopping the illegal invasions and stopping this left-wing descent into communism that the Chinese Communist Party is trying to advocate. Gentlemen, it's been an honor. We will see you next time. God bless you.
Thank you. Sign
Thanks.
off.
Terrific. Excellent.